Hey, Mike James here for Armor of God on the Web. Thanks for joining me. What I want to talk about today is righteous King Josiah, and he's known as one of the best kings amongst the Israelite and Judahite kings throughout history. Now, when you talk about Josiah, he died at age 40. He died so young. Why did God allow him to die at that young age when guys like Manasseh, who was an evil king, ruled for 55 years? Well, when you look at the Bible, there are about half a dozen reasons as to why God allows evil, pain, and suffering in the world. And I think it relates a little bit to this. Now, some of the reasons the Bible gives is, number one, there's sin in the world. Men are sinning against each other. There is a need to bring justice because of sin, and God does that. That's a second reason. A third reason is because of Satan and his minions working in the world. A fourth reason as to why there's evil, pain, and suffering is we learn lessons and we grow through the evil, pain, and suffering that we experience. Some of the evil, pain, and suffering is a mystery. And the sixth reason, and that's the one I'm going to focus on today, is there's evil, pain, and suffering because a greater good can sometimes come from evil, pain, and suffering. Now, what does that relate to when we talk about Josiah? Well, when we look at Josiah, let's get a little background on this king over in 2 Chronicles chapter 34 and verse 1. Here's what it says. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the ways of David his father, and declined neither to the right hand or to the left. Now, verse 3. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was yet young, he began to seek after the God of David his father, and in the 12th year he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem from the high places and the groves and the carved images and the molten images. So what is Josiah doing here? He's getting rid of the idolatry within the land, within the nation. He's taking it out, and that was something that God definitely wanted. He wanted Judah to get rid of all those idolatrous practices. Now, let's drop down to verse 14 of the same chapter. Verse 14, here's what it says. And when they brought out the money that was brought into the house of the Lord, Hilkiah the priest found a book of the law of the Lord given by Moses. So they had lost the book of the law, what told them about what God wanted from them. Now that they found it, Josiah is going to do something with it, and we're going to get to that over in 2 Kings chapter 23. Now, if you recall, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, they all give the stories of the various kings of Israel and Judah. Now, some of these stories give different details than other stories, so that's why we're going to 2 Kings chapter 23, and we want to emphasize something that the King's recollection is giving us that the Chronicles is not. In 2 Kings 23 and verse 3, let's pick it up right there. Here's what it says. And the king stood by a pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord and to keep His commandments and His testimonies and His statutes with all their heart and all their soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people stood to the covenant. So Josiah goes as far as getting the Judaites to agree to abide by this covenant that's in the book of the law that they had gotten long before. So again, the evidence of his righteousness is there. Other kings did not operate in the way that Josiah did. Now, how does he die? Well, he dies in battle. He goes up against the Egyptians, and the time frame, there are different ideas about the time frame. We're looking at between 612 and 609 BC is when Josiah dies. And what's going on in history at this time is Babylon is rising in the east as the new power in the area. Assyria is waning in their power. Egypt has waned in their power. And the Egyptian Pharaoh Necho decides to join forces with the Assyrians to battle the Babylonians. And as he's going to do this, Josiah goes out against him in battle. Now let's pick up the story here in 2 Chronicles 35 and verse 20. 2 Chronicles, back in 2 Chronicles 35 and verse 20, and it says this: After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho of Egypt came up to fight against Carchemish by Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. Now you might wonder, why is Josiah going out against him? Possibly because he was going to assist the Assyrians, and Josiah's got a bad taste in his mouth because he knew the Assyrians were an enemy. They had destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. They had made incursions into Judah. So picking it up in verse 21, Necho sends ambassadors to him, saying, What have I to do with thee, thou king of Judah? I come not against you this day, but against the house wherewith I have war. Now get this. Necho says this, the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh of Egypt, For God commanded me to make haste. Forbear thee from meddling with God who is with me, that he destroy thee not. So Necho says, hey, why are you coming against me? I'm doing this because God, and that's speaking of the God, folks, Yahweh. It's speaking of Yahweh, and you might wonder, well, what's Yahweh doing telling a pagan king what to do? Well, there's evidence of that in your Bible. Cyrus was a pagan king, and God had him allow the Jews to go back into their land to set up their temple once again. We know Nebuchadnezzar admitted that God was the true God in the book of Daniel. So we know God works with kings and leaders of countries, even if those leaders are not wholly committed to God. Now, with that book of the law, Josiah might have had some of this information, because when we think back to the story of Abraham and Abimelech, again, Abimelech had Sarah and he gave her back to Abraham because God spoke to him in a dream and told him to do that. So again, if Josiah was not hasty, and if he thought about the situation, he might have not been as impulsive as many humans are to rush into this battle. And again, Josiah was a righteous man, but he was not perfect, folks. Again, Jesus Christ was the only one who was perfect. With all the greatness of Josiah, he had some limitations, and that may be why he was so impulsive in going against Necho. Now, what happens in the battle is, while the battle is raging, Josiah is disguised within this battle, but one of the archers of the Egyptians hits him with an arrow, and that is what leads to his death. Now, what can we learn about this story of Josiah? Well, one thing we can learn is that God does work with other people that we may not think He's working with. We can't put God in a box. You got to remember the story of the donkey that speaks in the book of Numbers. Again, Josiah had access to that information. If he was aware of this, he might have had second thoughts about rushing into battle against someone who says on the authority of God he is doing what he is doing. But there is something very interesting in 2 Chronicles 34 that gives us insight into this and gets back to what I said at the outset of our discussion today. And I want to take a look at that. It's over in 2 Chronicles chapter 34, and I'm going to pick it up there in verse 27 of 2 Chronicles 34. Here's what it says. This is what was spoken to Josiah. Because thine heart was tender, and thou didst humble thyself before God, when thou heardest his words against this place, and against the inhabitants thereof, and humblest thyself before me, and didst rend thy clothes and weep before me, I have even heard thee also, saith the Lord. Behold, I will gather thee to thy fathers, and thou shalt be gathered to thy grave in peace. Neither shall thine eyes see all the evil that I will bring upon this place and upon the inhabitants of the same. So they brought the king word again. Now, why is this said to Josiah? That he was going to go to his grave in peace. His eyes would not see the evil that was coming on Judah. Now, what was that evil that was coming on Judah? Well, remember, because of all those bad kings, God was going to have to bring justice on Judah. Even though Josiah was a hiccup in this list of bad kings, Josiah's righteousness could not overcome all the sin of the previous kings. God was about to bring the hammer down on Judah. And soon after Josiah's reign, only a few short years later, in about 605 BC, the first incursion of the Babylonians comes into Judah. And then there were two more incursions over the next 20-some years. And what happens at the end in 586 BC? The king of Judah is taken into captivity. His eyes are taken out. His sons are killed in front of him. That's what God did not allow Josiah to see by taking him out of the scene when he was only 40 years of age. He saved him from witnessing the destruction of his nation and possibly the destruction of his progeny. So once again, we see there was a greater good here in what we think was evil or pain coming to Josiah. Josiah went to sleep when he died, and he did not have to see that destruction that was going to occur. Now, I hope you've gotten something out of today's message. I want to leave you with more. I want you to get a free full-length sermon CD, and the title of this CD is When Bad Things Happen to God's People. Now, you can get this CD by ordering. Send us an email at info@cgi.org. That's info@cgi.org. Ask for the sermon CD, When Bad Things Happen to God's People, or go to our website, www.cgi.org. That's www.cgi.org. Look under video and audio, and there you can search for the sermon, When Bad Things Happen to God's People, and you can listen to it right from the website. Also, don't forget to download our CGI Digital Network app. You can do so free of charge at the Google, Amazon, or Apple app stores. And please go to the website, www.cgi.org, and listen to our weekly sermon webcast. Thanks for joining us. See you again on the web.
The Church of God International would like to introduce the availability of a new app designed for your convenience. Download it now.